I taught at Harlow Creek Middle School for 6 years. I loved that job. And I want you to know that before I tell you why I walked out of that building one afternoon in November and never went back. My name is Sarah Calloway. I was an English teacher, 7th grade, the kind of teacher who stayed late to grade papers, who remembered every student's name, who genuinely believed that the right book at the right time could change a person's life. I was not the kind of person who believed in things she couldn't explain. I need you to understand that, too. Harlow Creek Middle School was built in 1961. 3 floors, wide corridors, the kind of institutional green paint on the walls that you only ever see in old schools and old hospitals. It smelled like chalk and floor wax, and something underneath both of those things that I could never quite identify. Something older. Something that had been there longer than the paint, longer than the floors, longer than anyone currently working in that building could remember. I used to think that smell was just age, the way old buildings absorb decades of human presence and give it back to you slowly in the air. I don't think that anymore. I started at Harlow Creek in the fall of 2016, fresh out of my teaching credential program, 26 years old, absolutely certain I was going to change lives. I had that particular kind of energy that new teachers have, the kind that hasn't been worn down yet by budget cuts and parent emails and the grinding reality of 30 12-year-olds who would rather be anywhere else on earth than in your classroom learning about sentence structure. I loved it anyway, even on the hard days, even when a lesson fell flat or a student looked right through me like I wasn't there. Room 214 was my classroom from my very first day. 2nd floor east wing, 3rd door on the left coming from the stairwell. The window faced the school's back field, and in the mornings, before the students arrived, the light came through it at an angle that made the whole room look almost golden. I used to sit at my desk in those early morning minutes and feel grateful. That's the honest truth. I felt grateful every single morning. The first 5 years were exactly what I had hoped for. Then came November of 2021. It started with the substitute. I had taken a personal day. My mother was sick, nothing serious, just a bad flu that needed someone to bring her soup and stay with her through the worst of it. My department head, a man named Mr. Okafor, arranged a substitute for my classes. Standard procedure. I left detailed lesson plans on my desk, clear instructions written out step by step, a seating chart clipped to the top of the stack. I'd had substitutes cover my classes before. It was never a problem. When I came back the next morning, 3 of my students were waiting outside my classroom door before the bell even rang. That almost never happened. Their names were Priya, Jamie, and a quiet boy named Cole, who sat in the back row and rarely spoke unless he had something precise and careful to say. Cole was the kind of student you noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because when he did speak, what he said was always worth listening to. He thought before he talked. At 12 years old, that's rarer than you'd think. Cole was the one who spoke first. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Who was the substitute yesterday?" I told him I wasn't sure of her name. I hadn't met her personally. She had been arranged through the district office while I was at my mother's house. "She knew your name," Cole said. "Not just your last name, your first name. She called you Sarah." I told him substitutes are given teacher information as part of their paperwork. That was probably how she knew. Cole looked at me for a moment with those careful, measuring eyes of his. "She also knew where you keep the spare chalk," he said, "in the left drawer of your desk, under the stapler." She went straight to it without looking, without opening any other drawer first. I didn't say anything to that, because I had never told anyone where I kept that chalk. It was a habit I had developed entirely on my own, in my very first week at that school, for no particular reason other than that it seemed like a logical place. No colleague had ever asked about it. I had never mentioned it in conversation. It was simply something I did, quietly, without thinking about it. The way you develop small private routines that belong entirely to you. I went inside, put my bag down, and told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There usually is. I opened my left desk drawer. The chalk was exactly where I always kept it, under the stapler, undisturbed. I stared at it for a moment. Then I closed the drawer and started getting ready for the day. The substitute's name, according to the district paperwork left on my desk, was Margaret Hale. I called the district office that afternoon during my prep period, just out of curiosity. Nothing more than that, or so I told myself. The woman on the phone was helpful, professionally cheerful, the way district office staff always are when they're answering routine calls. She looked up the name. A pause. She looked it up again. "Miss Calloway," she said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Not alarmed, just careful. "We don't have anyone by that name in our substitute registry. Are you sure that's the name on your paperwork?" I was looking at the paper as she spoke. It was sitting right in front of me on my desk. Margaret Hale, handwritten in neat, careful letters, slightly old-fashioned in style, the kind of penmanship you don't see much anymore. I told her yes, I was certain. She said she would look into it and call me back. She never did. I went to Mr. Okafor the next morning and showed him the paperwork. He was a practical man, methodical and organized, not given to fuss or drama. He wore the same style of blazer every day in different colors, and kept his desk in a state of immaculate order. He frowned at the form when I set it in front of him, the way he frowned at anything that didn't add up cleanly. "Who arranged this substitute?" I asked him. He looked at the form for a long moment. His eyes moved to the bottom of the page. "I did," he said slowly. "I must have. It has my signature." He pointed to the bottom of the form. His signature, clear as anything, in blue ink. The same signature I had seen on 100 memos and grade reports. "But I don't remember filling this out," he said. He picked up the paper and held it closer. "I must have been distracted. It happens." He set the form down, changed the subject, asked how my mother was feeling. I was still looking for the reasonable explanation, and I hadn't found it yet, but I told myself I would. Then Cole came to find me after school that day. He knocked on my open classroom door at 4:15, when the building was nearly empty and the afternoon light had gone long and flat through the window. He sat down across from my desk with the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had organized their thoughts before arriving. "She didn't teach us anything for our lesson plan," he said. I asked him what she did instead. "She talked," he said. "The whole class. Both periods I saw her. She just talked." I asked him what about. "The school," he said. "Its history. Things that happened here before any of us were born. She knew a lot of specific details, names of teachers from decades ago, which classrooms they used, what the building looked like before renovations. She talked about this room." He glanced around my classroom as he said it, slowly, taking in the walls, and the window, and the shelf of books along the back. "She said it used to be something different, before it was a regular classroom." I asked him what she said it used to be. "A music room," he said. "She said there was a piano, against that wall." He pointed to the far wall, the one with the window, the one that caught the morning light. "She said the teacher who used to work in this room, the music teacher, she never really left." A strange, flat quiet settled in the room when he said that last part. I looked at the far wall. "Cole," I said, "did anything about this woman seem unusual to you, beyond what she was saying?" He considered this question the way he always considered things, genuinely, without rushing to an answer. "She was cold," he said finally. "Not her personality. She was warm, in a way, friendly. but the room was cold the whole time she was in it. Not like the heat had gone out. More like the cold was coming from her specifically. I thought maybe she was just one of those people who always feels cold, so she doesn't notice the temperature. But then the bell rang and she walked out, and within about 30 seconds, the room was back to normal. He stood up, shouldered his backpack. At the door, he turned back. "One more thing," he said. "Priya looked her up last night. Margaret Hale. She found an old newspaper archive. There was a music teacher at this school with that name. She died here in 1974, in this room." He left before I could respond. I sat in my classroom alone for a long time after that, while the light faded outside and the building settled into its end-of-day quiet. The sound of a distant door, the hum of the heating system, the ordinary, mundane sounds of an old building, doing what old buildings do. I looked at the far wall. Then I got up and I went to the administrative office, and I asked Dolores, the school secretary, a woman in her late 50s who had worked at Harlow Creek for 30 years and knew every inch of its history, whether she had ever heard the name Margaret Hale. Dolores set down her pen. She didn't ask me how I knew it. She didn't look surprised, exactly. She looked the way people look when something they have been quietly expecting finally arrives. She said, "Who told you about Margaret?" I explained everything. The substitute, the paperwork, what Cole had said, the district office finding no record of her. All of it, from the beginning. Dolores listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk in front of her and looked at me steadily. "Margaret Hale taught music at this school from 1968 to 1974, she said. "She was exceptionally well-liked by colleagues, by students, by parents. One of those teachers people don't forget. You know the type. You probably are the type." She said that last part simply, without flattery. In the spring of 1974, she suffered a heart attack, in her classroom, on a Thursday afternoon, after all the students had gone home for the day. I asked which classroom. "Yours," Dolores said, "room 214. I had already known, somewhere between Cole telling me and sitting alone in that room, looking at the far wall, I had already known. "The janitor found her the next morning when he came to clean," Dolores continued. "A Friday, early, before anyone else arrived. She was sitting at the piano bench, perfectly upright, like she had simply sat down to rest and closed her eyes. She was quiet for a moment. The piano was removed not long after, she said. The school board felt it was. They didn't want students sitting at it, knowing what had happened there. The room was converted into a regular classroom a few years later when the music program was restructured. New paint, new arrangement, different furniture. But something stayed," I said. Dolores looked at me. "Over the years there have been reports. Not many, not consistent enough that anyone could call it a pattern officially, but teachers who covered that room when the regular teacher was absent, substitutes, a few of them reported unusual things. Small objects moved between one day and the next. One substitute, about 10 years ago, said she found sheet music on her desk one morning. Old paper, handwritten, that had not been there the evening before. She opened her bottom desk drawer and took out a folder. It was thin and worn at the edges, the kind of folder that gets taken out and put back many times over many years. She set it on the counter and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, the edges slightly brittle. Musical notation, handwritten in pencil, a full page of it, precise and careful. At the top of the page, in the same old-fashioned neat handwriting I had seen on the substitute paperwork left on my desk, 2 words and a year. Margaret Hale, 1972. I looked at it for a long time, without touching it. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I finally asked. When I was assigned to room 214 6 years ago, why didn't anyone mention any of this? Dolores looked almost apologetic, because for most teachers, nothing happens at all. Years go by without a single incident. We didn't want to alarm someone unnecessarily or create a situation where a teacher refused a room assignment based on a handful of old stories. The incidents are rare, spread out over decades. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. And honestly, and I know this sounds strange, I've come to believe that Margaret doesn't make herself known to everyone. Only certain people. Only, as far as I can tell, teachers she responds to. Teachers who care about their students the way she did. She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. She must like you, Miss Calloway, she said. She waited 6 years, but she found a way to let you know she was there. That night, I went back to the school. The building was empty. I had a key. Teachers are given keys to the building for exactly these kinds of after-hours situations. Though the situation I was returning for was not one anyone had anticipated when they handed me that key. I let myself in through the side entrance, walked up the stairs to the second floor, and stood in front of the door to room 214. I stood there for almost a full minute before I opened it. Inside, the room was dark, except for the orange glow of the emergency exit sign above the door, which cast just enough light to see by. My desks in their rows, my books on the shelf, the whiteboard with the ghost of last Friday's notes still faintly visible where the erasing hadn't quite finished the job. Everything exactly as I had left it. I walked to the far wall, the one Cole had pointed at, the one where there had for years been nothing but paint. 2 layers of it, institutional beige over the original institutional green. A kind of double blankness. I put my hand flat against it. Cold. Not room temperature cold. Not the cold of an exterior wall on a November night. A specific, concentrated cold. Like pressing your palm against something that has been in shadow for decades. Like touching the space where something used to be and finding that the absence itself has a temperature. I stood there for a while, my hand against the wall, the emergency exit sign humming faintly behind me. Then I said, "I know who you are." My voice sounded strange in the empty room, too loud, and then immediately too small, absorbed by the walls and the dark. "My name is Sarah," I said. "I've been teaching in your classroom for 6 years. I didn't know it was yours until today. I'm sorry it took me this long to find out." Silence. The heating system kicked on somewhere in the building, a low, distant rumble, and then quieted again. "I read about you," I said. "I know you were good at what you did. I know your students remembered you." I took my hand off the wall. The cold remained for a moment, fading slowly, like heat from a coal. I picked up my bag from where I had set it by the door, walked back to the center of the room, looked around one more time, at the desks, the shelves, the window, the whiteboard with its ghost of old notes. "I hope it wasn't too lonely," I said, "being here all this time." I turned toward the door, and that is when I heard it. It was faint, the kind of sound that exists right at the edge of perception, where you can't be fully certain whether you heard it or imagined it, except that the body knows the difference, even when the mind refuses to commit. Your body goes still in a way it doesn't go still for imagined things. Your breathing changes. Something in your chest that is not quite your heart shifts just slightly, like a door opening onto a room you didn't know was there. A piano chord, single, clean, resonant. The kind of chord that fills a room and then hangs in the air for a moment before it slowly dissolves. The way music does when it's played on an instrument that's been properly tuned and properly loved. From the far wall, where there had not been a piano for 47 years. I did not turn around. I don't know why. Some instinct, the same one that makes you not look directly at something you're afraid to confirm, kept me facing the door. I stood completely still and listened to the chord fade, and fade, and finally disappear into the silence of the empty building. Then I walked out. I told Mr. Okafor the next morning that I was resigning, effective at the end of the month. He stared at me across his organized desk and asked if there was anything at all, he could do to change my mind. I told him no. I thanked him for 6 years of being a good department head. He said he was sorry to lose me and that he meant it, and I could tell that he did. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. Books, personal items, the spare chalk from the left drawer under the stapler. Dolores hugged me when I stopped by the office to return my key. She didn't ask me why I was leaving. I think she knew. I said goodbye to the building without going back upstairs. I have not been back since. I moved to a different city the following spring. I teach English at a high school now. Newer building, different smells, different sounds. I like it. I have good students. I have a classroom with a window that faces a parking lot instead of a field, which is less beautiful, but also considerably less complicated. I never told anyone the real reason I left Harlow Creek. Not my mother, not my closest friends, not the colleagues I stayed in touch with. I heard a piano chord in an empty room, played by a woman who had been dead for nearly 50 years, and I left the next morning, because something about the sound of it told me clearly, in a way I could not have put into words then and can barely put into words now, that I had been seen. That whatever had been in that room with me had heard everything I said and had answered, and that the answer was a kind of goodbye. I have thought about Priya and Jamie, about what they saw or heard or felt in that classroom on that Thursday in November that made them both transfer out of my class by December without a word of explanation. I never asked them. I decided I didn't want to know. I think about Cole sometimes, about the way he described the room temperature dropping the moment the substitute arrived and returning to normal the moment she left, as if whatever she was could only hold itself together in one place for a limited amount of time before it had to let go. And I think about Dolores's words. She must like you, Miss Calloway. She waited 6 years, but she found a way to let you know she was there. I don't know what Margaret Hale wanted. I don't know if she was unhappy, or trapped, or simply unwilling to leave a place she had loved so much that dying there hadn't been enough to separate her from it. I don't know if what she did, appearing as a substitute, teaching her history to a classroom of 7th graders, moving through a school she had worked in half a century ago as if no time had passed, was simply her way of staying in that room all those years as if no time had passed. I don't know if that was something she chose or something she simply couldn't stop doing. I know that her handwriting was neat and careful. I know her students remembered her their whole lives. I know she died alone in a room she loved on a Thursday afternoon when everyone had gone home. And I know that when I stood in that room in the dark and said I was sorry it took me so long to find out about her, something in that room played a piano chord. I choose to believe it was a thank you. I choose to believe she is at rest now. I have to believe that. Because the alternative, that she is still there, still walking those green-painted corridors, still sitting down at a piano that no longer exists in a room that no longer belongs to her, that alternative is one I am not able to sit with quietly. So I don't. I teach my classes. I remember my students' names. I keep my spare chalk in the left drawer of my desk, under the stapler, out of habit I developed so long ago I can't remember starting it. And I check the far wall of every classroom I walk into, just in case, 2:59 in the morning is a strange hour. Too late to still be awake. Too early to call it morning. The kind of hour where the line between what's real and what isn't gets a little thin. Whatever you heard tonight, whatever made you reach for your phone instead of closing your eyes, that's between you and the dark. I'm just the one telling the story.